how you can only stay a while. Hey, I know that it's hard for you to say the things we both know are true. Well, tell me, how can I forget when love and love anymore? When I'm in love, things will never be the same again. I keep forgetting how you made that so, how you made that so clear. Every time I hear how you don't want to live a life, how it's gone too far, and you don't have to tell me why you're gone and the game is through. If this is what's real, if this is what's true, well, tell me, how can I forget when love and love, when not in love anymore? Things will never be the same again. How you made that so, how you made that so clear. When I'm in love, don't say, don't say, I know you're not mine anymore, anywhere, anytime. But tell me, how can I? And I keep forgetting when I'm in love. I keep forgetting we're not in love anymore. We're not in love. I keep forgetting things will never be the same again. I keep forgetting how you made that so clear. I keep forgetting we're not in love. I keep forgetting we're not in love, we're not in love anymore. I keep forgetting things will never be the same again. Keep forgetting how you made.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Monday, July 25th, 2011 regular meeting of the Glendale Transportation and Parking Commission. May we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Fwad,
Here.
Commissioner Sahakian,
Here.
Commissioner Yakubian, Commissioner Mangasarian, Chairperson Wiseman.
Here. What is next, please?
Item 1B is flag salute, Chairperson Wiseman.
Please join me in saluting our country's flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, God, indivisible, with liberty. Thank you. And may we have your report, please, regarding posting of the agenda?
Item 2, posting of agenda. The agenda for the Monday, July 25th, 2011 regular meeting of the Glendale Transportation and Parking Commission was posted by Friday, July 22nd, 2011 before 5:30 p.m. on the bulletin board outside of City Hall.
Thank you. What is next, please?
Item 3 is approval of minutes. Item 3A, June 27th, 2011 regular meeting minutes.
Are there any corrections or comments regarding the minutes from last month's meeting? Seeing none, may I hear a motion for approval of the minutes?
I'll move to approve. Second.
Okay, we have a motion to approve that's been seconded, so our minutes are approved. What is next, please?
Item 4 is oral communication. Discussion is limited to items not a part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. The Commission may question the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision.
I have no cards for oral communications, so we will move on to the next item, please.
Item 5 is action item. At 5A is the draft North Glendale Community Plan and draft circulation element amendments. At 5A1 is motion directing comments on the North Glendale Community Plan and amendments to the circulation elements to the Planning Commission.
Okay, we'll go to Rebecca to introduce the staff presentation.
Yes, thank you. We have staff from Community Development to come and give a PowerPoint presentation and then collect comments. So, Alan?
Thank you, Rebecca, and members of the Commission. My name is Alan Loomis. I'm Principal Urban Designer with the Planning Division of the Community Development Department. I'll be doing the first half of the presentation on behalf of our team. We've had a pretty wide range of folks in our department, including the larger department now, working on what is the North Glendale Community Plan that is in front of you. I also want to point out Laura Stahler, who's another principal planner and is a co-project manager with me on this effort, is here as well. And if Mike, my colleague, has our slides up. Yes. So the North Glendale Community Plan is a new component of the city's general plan. The TPC is already familiar with the circulation element. You may also be familiar with the land use element. And perhaps a few other components of the general plan that together constitute essentially the constitution, if you will, for guiding land development in the city of Glendale. Every city in California is required to have a general plan that covers a variety of topics. Cities are allowed to propose new components to their general plans, and in Glendale, that is what we're doing with the community plan. This is something we do not have currently. But the idea of the community plan is an effort to try and provide a comprehensive but manageable way of updating our existing general plan. It's going to exist between these sort of large citywide policies that our existing general plan covers and more neighborhood-specific guidelines. This is actually a problem of our existing general plan that doesn't sort of get into describing how individual neighborhoods should evolve. Existing general plan provides a kind of one-size-fits-all solution to development in the city. Community plans are intended to be a bridge in that process. We've started our effort in North Glendale. We think we'll probably end up with about maybe 5 to 6 community plans total. We're not entirely sure how the rest of the city will divide out. But North Glendale, to orient you, is basically we're talking about the area Spar Heights and Montecito Park, Montrose, on north, what is typically known as North Glendale or La Crescenta. So you can see on the map, this is the area covered by this community plan, the discussion for you today. Next. It's also important to know that this effort and the documents that you see in front of you are the product of an extensive community outreach process that started almost 2 years ago, and included multiple public workshops that were advertised and open to the entire community, held at Clark Magnet High School, Spar Heights Community Center, as well as a number of individual meetings with property owners, business owners, neighborhood groups. That largely in that sort of 2009 period was intended to identify the primary issues that were of concern to members of the North Glendale community. It turned out that there was a number of issues where they had major concerns and a kind of point of disagreement amongst the community, a number of topics where they felt that things were generally okay as they were. So in 2010, or late 2009 and into 2010, we formed the council's request a citizens advisory committee. It's about 30-something people, comprised of residents, property owners, commissioners, business owners, and they worked for almost a year and a half through a whole series of different meetings to kind of review the topics of disagreement and come up with a series of recommendations that then, over the course of 2011, we've been refining into a draft plan, which is what you see in front of you. So the product is the result of a lot of community discussion. As for the plan itself, it's fairly simple. Our intention was to make something that would be a very manageable, usable guide that the average person could pick up and understand and see what that was about. So it's organized into 5 basic chapters. You can see here. The introduction is pretty straightforward. It just tells you what a community plan is. And Chapter 2 is the community vision. This statement I won't read to you, but it's very important. It was actually drafted and wordsmithed by the advisory committee. It was one of the first things that they did. They said, we need to describe our vision in order to understand what we're doing. So Chapter 2 describes the community vision, and this is sort of the biggest statement about how North Glendale wants to evolve. And was really the sort of foundation by which all the subsequent efforts that we went through with them and drafting in the plan is really tries to come back and enact this vision. So this is a very important piece of the community plan. Chapter 3 is organized, we call it principles. You could also think of it as policies. There's about 12 sections. These are more or less correspond to existing general plan categories. This chapter is sort of what we might call like the sort of 30,000-foot overview of North Glendale. We're intending to sort of capture issues here that are relevant to the entire valley, La Crescenta Valley, North Glendale portions, and found to kind of ground those principles or those actions and principles that would have applicability citywide. So if you've reviewed the document, you'll see that in Chapter 3 there's a discussion of citywide principles that are thought those could be applicable to the entire city, and then a discussion about how that applies specifically to North Glendale. I'll say on the citywide principles, those are a merger of existing principles and policies expressed in our existing general plan, as well as principles and ideas that were expressed out of the 2006 long-range planning effort that many people in the community sort of participated in. And was those recommendations were adopted by council. So we're trying to blend a couple of different ideas in those citywide principles. There are 2 that are particularly relevant, I think, or actually 3 that are particularly relevant to the purview of the Transportation and Parking Commission. The first is this issue of, if you go back, Mike, of managed growth. This is one of the first things that we discuss is how do we envision growth and change transforming or happening in North Glendale. And what we end up describing is there are areas to maintain, areas to enhance, and potentially areas to transform. In North Glendale, the majority of the plan area, which is mostly single-family and some multifamily residential, is intended to be an area to maintain, generally preserve or conserve existing character of those neighborhoods. There are a few areas, mostly in the commercial corridors, that are areas to enhance. One of the things we heard from the advisory committee is a desire to see the commercial areas enhanced, largely aesthetic transformations, sort of upgrading the appearance of those corridors, but in some cases also thinking slightly differently about them. They didn't express a strong desire to see whole-scale transformation and kind of radical change, just a sort of polishing, if you will. But in North Glendale, we have areas to enhance, highlighted in the map. Those are the commercial corridors. And it's sort of, if you will, a kind of local, very localized adaptation of SCAG's regional compass blueprint planning that says future growth should be focused in existing commercial areas already served by transit. And if you drill down to a very local, almost suburban kind of scale that North Glendale is, that's what we're proposing. Of course, the other section that is clearly within the sort of interest of the Transportation and Parking Commission is Section 3.6 on mobility. And to discuss some of the policies and ideas we have on mobility, I'd like to turn the presentation over to our mobility planner in the Planning Division, Mike Nielsen, He'll go through that particular section, and then I'll wrap it up and kind of conclude for any discussions and questions you will have. Mike?
Good afternoon. Like Alan was saying, I'll go over the mobility principles for tonight. We're developing a comprehensive mobility network that will focus on an updated list of road classifications that will attempt to balance a variety of transportation modes that exist in North Glendale. We're looking at pedestrian safety improvements along the existing commercial corridors and neighborhood centers and schools. We are looking also at expanding the bicycle infrastructure to connect to local trails and the regional roadway network, as well as maintaining local and regional transit on existing corridors. Also collaborating with the nearby jurisdictions in having a coordinated mobility network. So, for example, if there's a bike lane on Foothill, that it doesn't just run out at the Glendale city limits. Based on the comments we received since the North Glendale Community Plan was published, we realized that the mobility map needed to be revised. So with that, we've revised the mobility map as well as the park and recreation map 3.6 and 3.8 for tonight's presentation. And we've revised the definition of the road classifications as well. Those road classification definitions are in Exhibit 2 of the staff report as amendments to the circulation element. So we would like those definitions to the circulation element to exactly match the definitions in the mobility map. So with that, I'd like to go over each road classification proposed for the North Glendale Mobility Network. With that, I would like to start with the primary auto network. These are roads and freeways basically outlined on purple in the map that you see. These roads prioritize the movement of automobile traffic. These roads primarily serve as a pass-through. These are connecting to regional networks and service traffic as well as truck traffic. However, with the exception of freeways, the streets within the primary auto network, which is also outlined as currently as major arterials in the circulation element, those streets that are within Glendale need to serve all other modes of transportation as well. Layered onto that in orange are the transit priority streets. These roads give priority to moving transit vehicles. The transit streets in North Glendale include those with existing Metro and B-Line service. So the routes that you see in orange are the routes that currently have Metro bus lines and B-Line bus lines. Much of North Glendale's higher density housing, commercial centers, and neighborhood centers are directly or adjacent to these transit routes. Therefore, the community plan supports maintaining the service along these corridors. In addition to maintaining the service, amenities such as signal prioritization, exclusive bus lanes, bus shelters, all these should be considered along these corridors to enhance the transit experience in North Glendale. Outlined in green are the primary bicycle routes proposed for the North Glendale Community Plan area. Outlined are the key links in the bicycle network, connecting to regional bike lanes and bike paths in La Cañada Flint Ridge, in the city of LA, and the county of LA portion of La Crescenta. These routes serve to connect to minor routes on local streets and off-street trails, which I'll show you a little bit later on the Community Services and Parks map. This map also outlines these routes are intended to run on or adjacent to the primary auto network, and these serve as viable alternatives to connect to local and regional destinations. So while these bicycle routes don't intend for the elimination of parking lanes or auto travel lanes, traffic calming measures are supported on these routes. And we're fully coordinated with the Bicycle Master Plan update, so we do intend to update these routes as the Bicycle Master Plan update is in progress. Outlined in red are the primary pedestrian areas. These are areas that include Spar Heights and the Montrose Shopping Park, which are have very much established as a pedestrian-oriented shopping district. Other areas such as Verdugo City and Foothill Boulevard between Dunsmore and Lauderdale are areas that we see potential in supporting a primary pedestrian area. Primary pedestrian areas are intended to be mixed-use commercial districts where people, where residents can or visitors can park once to do a variety of activities and visit a variety of destinations within the area. In primary pedestrian areas, priority is given to creating excellent conditions for pedestrians. That could mean anything from wide sidewalks to safe crossings, enhanced crosswalks, street trees, street lighting, bicycle and transport infrastructure should also be convenient and close to these primary pedestrian areas. Next, I'd like to go over the Community Services Parks and Trails map. Likewise, with the mobility map, we intend to update the Community Services and Parks map to better illustrate the potential of all the open space amenities and parks amenities that North Glendale has to offer, and look into a variety of existing and proposed bicycle paths, routes, and trails to connect to the variety of hiking trails in the Verdugos, Duke Majan Wilderness Park. I also noted that while the pedestrian priority areas are not necessarily part of a community services and park map, I wanted to note that the intention of the connection of bicycle routes to these destinations. With that, we go into Chapter 4, which describes the 7 neighborhoods within the North Glendale Community Plan area. And while Chapter 4 is mostly intended for outlining design guidelines for the Design Review Board's review, there are some mobility policies that are discussed in the primary pedestrian areas. So these are discussions of various traffic calming measures, streetscape improvements, and bicycle infrastructure improvements. One of these we've already installed, which are the bike lanes along Foothill Boulevard. Those bike lanes we also coordinated with the county portion of La Crescenta, so you could ride that continuously from the county all the way up to the city of Los Angeles city limits. Some other pedestrian improvements that we intend to support through the North Glendale Community Plan process is looking at a variety of crossing improvements, which includes landscape bulb-outs, shortened crossings, and shared lane markings for bicyclists. With that, I'll pass it over to Alan Loomis, and he'll go over the policy framework and next steps.
Thank you. We have 2 more slides for you'll indulge us. The final component of the North Glendale Community Plan is a discussion on policy framework, which outlines not only the public process that generated the plan, but also how this plan relates to Glendale's existing general plan, a variety of other documents that exist or are under preparation, policy documents for Glendale, as well as state documents and national documents. All that sort of stuff is all kind of wrapped up in Chapter 5 of this kind of discussion of the policy framework that grounds this plan. There'll probably be some areas, I imagine, the TPC will have some interest in looking at those sections. And that pretty much ties up the North Glendale plan. Is about 100 pages as it's drafted so far, copiously illustrated and hopefully engaging reading. In terms of next steps, we have, as I outlined before, we've had an extensive public discussion so far on this plan. The plan as you see it today was presented, when was it, April? Or late June, to the community advisory groups that worked on it and in a public forum. It was presented in an informational fashion to the Planning Commission and Design Review Board, and starting last week, we've been presenting this to various commissions for input and discussion. So you are our 3rd commission, our 2nd today, because we met with Historic Preservation Commission this afternoon to take a look at this plan and offer comments. Starting on Thursday, we'll be looking at the plan with the Design Review Board. And basically with all those commissions, we're looking for comments that you as the various commissions would like to communicate to the Planning Commission, which is charged with looking at the entire package of amendments and policies comprehensively and making a recommendation ultimately to City Council. So right now we're scheduled on August 17th to present this to the Planning Commission with all the input that we'll have received up to that point. the Planning Commission's review. We expect that they will have some revisions to give us, and that we will be spending September making those revisions before we're prepared to take a plan in front of City Council. So tonight we're looking for the input that you would like to communicate to the Planning Commission on both the draft community plan as well as the draft amendments to the circulation element that Mike mentioned. And I believe in your package there is also a draft motion. If you're inclined to do so tonight, we'd appreciate making a motion to the Planning Commission. That way we can communicate your comments to the Planning Commission when we meet with them on the 17th. So with that, our presentation is finished. We'll be happy to entertain questions, clarifications. We know it's a very large document to wrap your head around. So thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you very much for your presentation, and I'll go to...
I have a quick question.
Sure.
How is the Safe Route to School program tying into this? I know we received the grant, and I'd like to see if it's incorporated in this plan, and if not, if we can incorporate it somehow, because there will be some elements that will impact the plan.
Absolutely. I think Mike or maybe somebody from the traffic division can answer this in greater detail, but my understanding is that the Safe Routes to School is almost targeted to specific intersections. So when we didn't think it was appropriate to put on a map that's looking at a regional system, but that comment has come up already from our early review at the Planning Commission, so we could certainly include some discussion of that. Mike, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think, if anything, we would maybe include a couple of sentences in terms of supporting Safe Routes to School policies and also supporting the program to be extended and continued to other elementary schools in North Glendale. One of the other thoughts is looking at, in terms of where we have our bicycle routes and matching that with the bicycle master plan update.
Yeah, and to some extent, I think we see that happening, because I believe in terms of the Safe Routes to Schools projects, one of them is at Dunsmore Elementary, which is in the plan area here, and also happens to be next to a street that now has Sharrows on it. So seeing it being tied together already, you had a
Yeah, I think, Alan, you mentioned there were some controversies or differences of opinion within the plan.
Yes.
Can you describe what those were and maybe how they affect items within the jurisdiction of this commission in particular?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the largest area of disagreement that we heard when we first met with the community was about the nature of development on Foothill Boulevard. To a large extent, that discussion was about the zoning standards on Foothill Boulevard that currently allow for buildings up to 50 feet high, which was largely perceived as being out of sync with what the community thought was acceptable, and a number of contentious cases that went to design review board to sort of that illustrated that fact. So a big part of our discussion has been a rezoning effort on Foothill Boulevard, and to a large extent that's where we focused our effort, is trying to craft new zoning standards for Foothill. It's obviously is in the purview of the Planning Commission. That being said, there was also a good deal of discussion about the streetscape character of Foothill Boulevard, and one of the early topics that we took on with the advisory committee was what sort of streetscape. As you may be aware, there is some discussion or interest in medians to match what they have in Lock and Out of Flint Ridge. And so we looked at the pros and cons of medians as well as other alternatives for streetscape improvements on Foothill. And the consensus of the advisory committee was that medians were probably not appropriate, but maybe sort of extended bulb outs that could provide landscaping, sort of narrow the width of the street, provide landscaping for pedestrians. That was probably more appropriate, with maybe some targeted sort of, I don't want to, mini medians, if you will, but sort of protected crosswalks at key locations. We didn't go to the extent of designing the street or determining where that could happen. But But that was kind of where we ended the discussion. That also allowed for bike lanes and for left turn movements, which are the left turn movements are very important to the business community.
Well, I'd heard about the median controversy, and it surprises me, as well as the council member who talked to me about it. I mean, I can see how continuous median might be an issue for left turns into businesses. Why weren't, abbreviated medians like along Highland or Laurel Canyon in Los Angeles, where they're intermittent and they don't interfere with left turning, so even those were rejected?
Pretty much, yeah.
And
there was a strong sense from the business community that businesses on Foothill that they would not be supportive of medians. And I think once we started talking to the people who had an interest in medians, it turned out to a large extent what they were interested in was the greening that came from medians, the trees. I do want to say that when I say consensus of the advisory committee, that doesn't mean everybody walked away from the meeting happy. There are, that means that people were sort of willing to concede that might be an acceptable alternative.
Businesses were concerned about making left turns.
Yes.
And there was no way to design medians that didn't interfere with left turns? There were too many? Or?
Well, as I said, we didn't go to the extent of designing the street and kind of laying out where there could be medians. We didn't go into that level of detail. But
to me, that's disappointing. I can completely understand the left turn issue, but it would seem there are stretches where that wouldn't interfere with anybody's left turn.
Possibly, but like I said, we didn't look into it. I think the other thing that's important to note is on Foothill Boulevard, there's also a strong interest in undergrounding the utilities.
I was going to ask that as well.
And one of the questions we posed to the advisory committee on all of these issues of aesthetic improvements on Foothill Boulevard was, would you be willing to have an assessment district in your neighborhood to help pay for the cost of doing that? And the overwhelming answer was no. They'd really like for somebody else to pay for it. And so in the absence of obvious funds to sort of do that kind of work, we felt that proposing extensive streetscape operations was probably not prudent.
Is there any discussion of decorative street lighting beyond just the standard?
Not that I recall, Mike. Do you recall if anybody brought that? Street lighting on Foothill Boulevard? I don't believe that we got it.
LA on Highland has done some quite attractive things.
I don't believe that came up in the discussion.
Is that worth pursuing at any level, or it's a cost issue, I understand?
It's a possibility. I think one of the things we were hoping to do with the idea of the pedestrian priority areas is say that's where a lot of this sort of effort should go. And in fact, I think one of the hopes with sort of targeting on a map pedestrian priority areas is that allows us to have a policy foundation where we could seek pedestrian improvement grant money from Metro Call for Projects and other funding sources, where right now we don't have that sort of policy framework to target those kinds of improvements. But street lighting, decorative street lighting could be a possibility anywhere.
Any signage element announcing you're here or there?
There was definitely some interest in sort of having something that says welcome to, now you're in Glendale, not Tahunga or the county, or
welcome to wherever you are.
Right. One of the topics too on that front was Verdugo City. There was a lot of discussion about what is Verdugo City, where is Verdugo City. There's a sign on the freeway that says get off at Verdugo City, and then you don't know where you've ended up when you've arrived at Verdugo City. And that's why one of those pedestrian priority areas is right next to Verdugo City Post Office. Saying, well, let's try and make a place there that you'll recognize you've arrived, and not just a freeway exit.
Okay, that's all I had.
If I may, I'll add briefly to what Alan said, specifically regarding the controversy about medians. Having served on the committee and having endured a number of those discussions, the first issue for several of the businesses, most notably the car dealerships and Trader Joe's, get deliveries by large trucks that typically use the current center left turn lane in Foothill Boulevard to do their maneuvering. And so it's kind of difficult to architect medians in those areas that can, meet the needs of those businesses. There were also several business owners who, I guess the way to say this is they have a vision of Foothill Boulevard that was different from most of the residents on the committee, which was they'd like to see it more of a high-speed transit-oriented corridor, and anything that's done to, cut down on the speed or mobility of vehicles is seen as a negative. So I think that was an issue as well. I would note that if you do read what the plan says, it talks about limited landscape medians at the city gateways, for instance at Lowell and Pennsylvania, and other issues like pedestrian safety islands, particularly where a proposed crossing might be at the post office. So, you know, I think there is some wiggle room in there for some limited landscape medians on Foothill Boulevard. Again, it's going to need to be a process to decide, you know, what and where and whether it's going to interfere with anyone. So, sorry to interrupt. I want to.
Sure. Was traffic calming discussed at all on these majors? Foothill, for example, and streetscape as a means of traffic calming?
Yeah, that was a large part of the discussion, and as Chair Weissman pointed out, there was a tension, I think, about what is the purpose of Foothill Boulevard and to what extent are we talking about traffic calming and how much traffic calming on Foothill. In large measure because it is still a major arterial and it is the bypass route when the 210 gets blocked up, and so it does need to carry a certain amount of traffic. You know, Foothill ends up being a rather interesting discussion, and as Mike illustrated on the maps, it's both a primary auto street, primary bike street, a primary transit street, and it has a pedestrian discussion, a topic of further kind of those competing. And I think the advisory committee did a fairly good job of trying to understand those competing demands, even if they didn't arrive at a full resolution. But there was certainly some interest in traffic calming, and not only on Foothill Boulevard, but on some of the other streets, particularly Ocean View as it goes south from Montrose into Spar Heights.
All right. Well, are there any other comments or questions? Sure, Mr. Mayor.
I have a general question. Good evening. I'm new in this. Alan, the whole thing started in 2009?
Yes.
Is this the first official report to this commission on this issue, or you have been here before?
Yes, as far as an agendized topic on North Glendale. Yeah, we've been working with the advisory committee.
Okay, just help me out to make a decision because I'm very new and I don't know if this commission has been involved in this through different committees or not, but I have no idea about this. So every single concern of citizens and the commercial community has been addressed in this.
We would like to think so, and where their concerns have not been addressed or resolved in the plan, we have made a commitment to the committee and the citizens involved that we will communicate the competing interests to the decision makers. So that's why I'm trying to be very fair about the discussion on Foothill Boulevard and the competing interests.
So you expect us to make a decision right here to make recommendations to Planning Commission on
we
this
would
issue?
appreciate that very much, yes. I'm sure the Planning Commission would as well.
Thank you.
Maybe to clarify a little bit, it's really comments that are being asked for, I guess, more than recommendations. I mean, I imagine a comment could also be, a recommendation, and I would have no problem or hesitation in, making any of those comments. If there's nothing else, I guess I can go ahead. First of all, I have a little bit of a different view from this since I saw it from the inside for the last year and a half. And I would say, first of all, I think that the outreach effort and the attention paid to having a diverse committee was very well placed and well done. I think we had very good representation from both commission levels, myself for this commission and Mr. Sheets from the Planning Commission. We had DRB members. We also had a lot of non-Glendale members, which I thought is a very important thing because the Crescenta Valley really is a cross-jurisdictional kind of area between the city of La Cañada, Flint Ridge, unincorporated county, the city of Glendale, and the city of Los Angeles. And I think it was good that we were able to have a lot of representation from unincorporated La Crescenta. People don't really take note that when they cross Pennsylvania, they're going into another jurisdiction. It appears to be, a seamless experience. So in terms of the diversity of the committee and the representation of the different constituencies, I feel pretty good that that was done probably about as well as it could have been done. And if you heard some of the arguments that we got into, there was a definite diversity of opinion on a lot of subjects. I'll go back to the mission statement, which talks about providing transportation options, because I think really a lot of the mobility planning in this document really does spring from that. If we look at the circulation element amendments in Exhibit 2 that set out the 4 priority functions for a complete streets policy, I'm not sure, but I think this may be the first time in the history of Glendale that we've had such a detailed explanation of what a complete streets policy is and what it's going to mean for us going forward in our planning. And in terms of making sure that all of the various transit modalities, automobile and public transit and pedestrians and bicyclists, are considered in this, I think that's a major step forward for planning in Glendale. I think enhancing the transit experience within the planning area is going to be a challenge given the budgetary constraints that we live in currently. But I think that's also something that's going to be very important for us to do moving forward. One thing I did want to mention specifically in terms of possible location for pedestrian and bike amenities on Foothill Boulevard is the Glendale Water and Power property where the Foothill Well is located. It just occurred to me that since we have something that's already owned by a city entity, in terms of budgetary constraints especially, it might be easier for us to provide some amenities in an area that's already city-owned land. I do support what the plan mentions in terms of limited landscape mediums and appropriate signage and landscaping, especially at the city gateways, Lowell on the west and Pennsylvania on the east. I also agree with the designation of the signature streets in the area where you have Foothill and Honolulu called out, and the discussion of that. I guess the last thing I want to say is I really want to extend my compliments and thanks to the planning department, Mr. Hagani, Mr. Foy, their entire staff. They have done an excellent job on this plan, in my opinion. A lot of work has gone into this, a lot of drafts, a lot of, I won't exactly say blood on the floor, it didn't get that contentious, but a year and a half worth of discussions and flip charts and writing stuff down, and I think it's been distilled. I've never seen a community plan before, so this is a really impressive looking document to me, and I hope it's going to be a way going forward for planning in Glendale and other communities besides just the North Glendale community. And with that, unless anyone has anything else to add, I would entertain a motion that our comments tonight be forwarded to the Planning Commission for their consideration. Well, we kind of started with questions and it sort of invisibly merged into comments. I don't know. Please, I don't mean to cut off debate. Please, if there was anything you still wanted to say.
Well, Bill, I mean, what you're saying is essentially this was well done. It's gone as far as it can go with all the competing interests, and we may have personal preferences, but most things seem to have been considered, distilled, and this is what you get.
That's my opinion. I mean, if anyone has any strong feelings about things like medians on Foothill Boulevard or anything, I would certainly encourage you to express them.
I'm a median guy, but it sounds like that was discussed, thrashed, some allowances made for this, which you could get away with, so I won't have a comment.
Okay.
I mean, it's very easy to get sidetracked, and and start thinking and discussing issues that are not transportation related. And at some point you need to refrain and then start thinking at it as the transportation commissioner. The plan is a good. I applaud the plan as well. It's a good plan. It covers basically everything that the department would like to see in a successful transportation plan. And myself as a commissioner, I'm sure my colleagues as well. Looking ahead, I mean, I still would like to see the transit system connected to a transportation hub, which is missing, but obviously that hub is not going to be in the North Glendale area. But that's a vision that I have, and also I haven't given up on the bullet train, the rapid train, also the stop in this region. But job well done, honestly, job well done. And as far as the design elements of the streetscapes and the striping and traffic calming devices, I'm sure as they start getting designed, we'll probably have a look at them. But I also caution getting too much of the public involved in it, because you can't get anywhere if that's to happen. But of course, good comments are welcome.
All right. Thank you. Anyone have anything else to add?
For lack of in-depth information on this plan, there are recommendations by staff. I think it's transportation staff that is part of our package. I would like to propose that we adopt those as part of our recommendation to the Planning Commission.
Well, with that, I'll go ahead and move the motion. And I believe it is in our package. I did see the motion right here. It's one motion. I move the motion to send our recommendations to Planning Commission.
One small comment, if I may make, on the terminology for bicycle routes and bicycle-friendly streets, or some people even call them bicycle boulevards, class 2, 3, and 1. You're with Department of Transportation, right? I mean, are you?
Actually in the community planning department.
Okay. Do these match what the state's vision is on what bicycle-friendly streets are? We kind of use bicycle routes in this document, and I'm not sure anything can be called bicycle route. And bicycle routes in the Caltrans document, I think it's in Highway Design Manual, Chapter 1000, if you like to look it up. Bicycle routes can be anything. You can sign a little sign there saying bicycle's okay, and that will become a bicycle route. Rather than doing a lot of elaborate things that you're talking about, like bike sharrows, and all other things, signals and things. Those will become bicycle-friendly streets. So all I'm asking is, we can call it whatever we want here in Glendale, but to be consistent with the Caltrans's definition of bicycle ways, if you want to put it in.
Right. I think Mike was involved in the Safe Route or the Safe and Healthy Streets project team, and probably can answer that question in greater detail if necessary. But one of the big concerns we had and why we proposed the revisions that you saw on the mobility map in terms of terminology was, as much as possible, we want to make sure the terminology we're adopting here plugs in or matches other terminology that Caltrans and other agencies would use. So there's that kind of correlation.
That's the only request I have. So
yeah, we'll definitely make sure that the terminology matches up.
Okay, so that was the explanation. We don't need any more. I have a motion. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
May we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Fuad?
Yes.
Commissioner Sahakin?
Yes.
Commissioner Yakubian? Commissioner Mangasarian?
Yes.
Chairperson Wiseman?
Yes. What is next, please?
Thank you.
Item 6 is commission staff comments, updates.
Okay, I'll go to staff first if there are any updates. Or
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I just wanted to give a brief update on the bicycle master plan update that we're working on. We recently updated our website, and now members of the community, business community, residents, anyone who wants to go to our website can put their comments and send them electronically to us. We also had some comment cards printed, and they can be found at public counters, city buildings, and some bicycle shops throughout the city. And also, upcoming in the month of August, we're planning another bicycle advisory committee meeting, and that date is to be determined, but we've been hard at work on this plan, and progress continues.
One comment
thanks.
on that, Mr. Chair. The postcards, do we have them on the Beeline buses?
We did talk about putting them on the Beeline buses, Commissioner Sahakian, but we didn't do that yet. We'll be working on it, and I appreciate the reminder.
Good. I think it will be good because it's the same type of people that they will ride their bicycle.
All right. Any of my colleagues have any comments on? I'll just say very briefly, congratulations to the folks at the LA Department of Transportation for having successfully brought Southern California through Carmageddon without the end of the world happening or any of the other dire predictions that were made. I have to say I was pretty impressed seeing my colleague, Commissioner Sahakian, being interviewed by the Channel 7 News the weekend of Carmageddon. And I think because of the fact that there was so much publicity and everybody was so scared, nothing happened. So,
And on that note, Mr. Chair, I also briefed Jano about the whole approach of unified command, what was adopted in managing this incident, because it was an incident. It's similar to having a major earthquake where you can lose the Mulholland Tunnel and one of the bridges, and you need to respond to it. But I'll be more than happy in the future if you guys are interested to also brief you very quickly. So,
yeah, I think it might be good to hear that. All right.
there you go. That's what made it happen. One more, if I may, is I would like to welcome the new member, Arsen Mangasarian. I think you're going to be a great asset to the Commission. Your knowledge in planning and your expertise in transportation is going to be well received.
All right. And with that, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
A second.
We are adjourned. Thank you.